Remember how they reworked damage numbers so they won't obstruct your view anymore? Well, let's just say that's not gonna happen today, friends. See, the brand new Frost is so ridiculously strong, you'll be dealing red crits in the tens of millions, outgunning even the Red Crit King Harrow himself. So, in this Warframe build guide, I will tell you everything you need to know about the Frost rework and, of course, how to build him super duper strong. Big shoutouts to all generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on. And now, let's get right into it. Alright, first of all, Frost's abilities. What can the man do? And luckily, this is very straightforward. First of all, his passive is pretty cool. All of Frost's abilities have their cold status effect duration doubled in comparison to all the other Warframes. And as if that's not enough, Frost also gains 50 armor for every enemy within a 5-meter radius that is affected by cold status effects. Now, while this passive is definitely not bad, the real kicker here is the augment mod biting Frost for his passive, and that gives you plus 200% crit chance and plus 200% crit damage against enemies when they are fully frozen. I don't know about you, but where I come from, we call that pretty darn impressive. His first is called Freeze, and that's pretty much what it does. You shoot out an icicle, and on impact it creates an AoE, and enemies in that AoE will suffer 6 cold status effects. If you hit an enemy directly, that one enemy will be permanently frozen. All in all, that's nice, but definitely nothing special. However, what I should mention here is the augment Freeze Force, which, if you hold down the ability cast button, it infuses your weapon with cold damage based on your ability strength. That is really nice, not only because it gives your weapons potentially a lot more damage, but also because this cold infusion will combine with any other elements that you have on the weapon, meaning if you, for example, only put Toxin on a weapon and then you use that skill, the Toxin on the weapon plus the cold infusion from the skill will combine into Viral, which is one of the strongest elements. So yeah, you can definitely play around a bit with this, and I would highly suggest not subsuming his first skill off. It's too good for that. His second ability, Ice Wave, though, also should go by the name Please Replace Me with Something Better from the Helmet. See, what this thing does is it creates an AoE cone in front of you where it shoots out, well, pretty much what the name says, an ice wave. Enemies hit by the wave will also suffer 6 cold status effects, and that is pretty much it. Yes, there's also an augment. No, you're probably not want to use this. And in general, Ice Wave and Freeze kinda do the same thing, right? Putting 6 cold status effects on enemies in an AoE. It's just that, Freeze is pretty good, especially with the augment, whereas Ice Wave has a longer cast animation, it costs double the energy, and in my opinion, it just isn't needed at all. So if you want to use a helmet ability, I would say put it in this slot. Frost's third goes by the name Snow Globe, and, well, it creates a snow globe which is a 360-degree protective bowl. Now, when it comes to Snow Globe, there are a lot of interactions and things that can happen with the enemies and all that stuff, but I think most of that isn't really important in day-to-day combat, so I'm gonna simplify to only the important parts. Snow Globe is great if you have a defense-type mission or an excavation where you want to protect a certain thing from incoming fire. You can have up to 4 snow globes on the field at any given time, and if you cast it multiple times in the same position, then its health will be stronger. And speaking of its health, the amount of damage that the snow globe can take is based on your ability strength, but also on the armor that you have the moment you cast this skill. In other words, thinking back to our passive, getting 50 armor for every enemy affected by cold in a 15-meter radius, that means Frost is probably going to run a whole lot of armor, meaning the snow globe will drastically benefit from all that armor and therefore have much more health. By the way, if you want to get rid of a snow globe, you can always cast his first ability onto the snow globe from the outside, and that will instantly destroy the entire thing. Snow Globe also has an augment called Chilling Globe, and this one makes it that when enemies get into the globe, there is a chance that they instantly get permafrozen. But as you'll see here in a minute, our Frost build is going to permafreeze every enemy in the entire tileset all the time anyway, so Chilling Globe doesn't really have a place, and I would not suggest getting this augment. And finally, Frost's fourth ability, Avalanche, is absolutely super duper amazing. What this does is, it instantly freezes all the enemies in a huge AoE while at the same time stripping away their armor. And this is great for 2 exact reasons. First of all, armor stripping is of course always amazing. Second, when enemies are permanently frozen, they cannot attack you, so you're pretty much safe. And also, remember the augment for his passive ability, you get plus 200% crit chance and plus 200% crit damage against all enemies that are frozen. But we're not even done yet, because Avalanche, just like all the other abilities, also has an augment called Icy Avalanche, and this one is super great for your survivability because it gives you overguard for every enemy that you cast Avalanche on. This, in my opinion, is a definite must if you want to play Frost in Steel Path, because it will not only keep you, but also the entire teams and all companions alive through masses of overguard. Alright, so much for Frost's abilities, but before we jump into the build right now, I want to quickly take a minute to talk about Frost's cold status effects, because they are drastically different from all the cold status effects that other Warframers deal. Here's what I mean. With the new update last week, we got a change in cold status effects, where beforehand you could always only apply 9 cold status effects, which would drastically slow down the enemies but not completely freeze them. Now, once an enemy has 10 cold status effects on them, they will be permanently frozen for exactly 3 seconds, and after that 3-second interval, they will defreeze again, and the number of cold status effects on them is going to go from 10 instantly down to 3. In other words, when you play any other Warframe in the game, you have a 3-second time interval to kill the enemy when they're fully frozen, and after that, you will have to build up freeze again. With Frost though, this looks drastically different. Not only does his passive make that his cold status effects have twice the duration, but also the freeze duration from his abilities can be modded with ability duration to make it last even longer. So if you play him with a healthy amount of ability duration, it's not going to be difficult at all to have your enemies perma-frozen for like 10-15 seconds to give you all the time in the world to take care of them. This is, by the way, also what makes, I think, Avalanche one of the best AoEs in the entire game right now. And as if that's not enough, also with last week's update, we got a buff to cold status effects, in case you haven't heard about it yet, which is that not only will enemies take more crit damage when they are affected by cold, like they were before, but now, if they're affected by 10 cold status effects, that vulnerability to crit damage is going to be twice as high as it would be with just 1 to 9 status effects. So yeah, what that all means for Frost is, with the augment mod for his passive, he not only gets plus 200% crit chance and crit damage to all enemies that are frozen, but through the nature of cold in general, they get even more vulnerable to the crit damage at the same time, turning Frost into an absolute crit monster. That is also exactly what the build is going to reflect, but before that, I would also be super happy if you could maybe spare a like, because it helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm, so massive 10 kisses go out to you, and now, let's jump right into the build. And when we're talking about the build, the first thing I want to go into is actually his Helminth ability, because we should pick and choose which one we want to go for before we actually start modding Frost himself. And when it comes to Helminth skills, you're pretty much open to use whatever you like. You can go for Rhino's Roar if you just generally want to give yourself more damage, especially if you use a weapon with damage over time effects. But as we'll also see, Frost is very energy hungry, so picking any skill that helps with energy will definitely be helpful. As for me personally, I went for a grouping ability because it also synergizes very well with his kit, and here I chose Korra's Ensnare simply because of the fact that it groups the enemies in a way that their heads are exposed, so I can play both weapons that deal AoE damage as well as weapons that want to do precise headshots. But of course, if you personally don't want to go for headshots anyway, you could also use any other grouping ability here. Next, with the Helminth skill done now, let's take a look at the Archon shards here, because Frost really benefits from putting a couple shards on. First, I used 2 yellow shards. For me, they're Tau Forge, but you could also use normal ones. Doesn't make too much of a difference. And those focus on casting speed, because especially his 4th skill Avalanche, which in my opinion is his strongest ability, takes a lot of time to cast, and you want to go into cast speed if you play Frost. And then for the other 3 shards, I went for 3 blues that give me more maximum energy, simply because of the fact that Frost will need a lot of mods, and not having to use a flow mod for maximum energy is definitely going to come in handy here, so I outsourced that to the Archon shards. As for the build, it's relatively straightforward. First of all, in order to stay alive, we use the Icy Avalanche augment that I also previously mentioned. That gives us overguard, and that will be more than enough for survivability. However, speaking one more time about Avalanche, this ability costs 100 energy to cast, meaning Frost is a very energy hungry frame, and that's why we need to have some sort of energy economy. If you wanted to, you could definitely go for Equilibrium here. I personally went for Arcane Energize, and it is barely enough for this build, but you gotta make sure to not spam the skills here, otherwise you're gonna run dry really quickly. Next, we want to make sure that we have a lot of ability strength. A, because it gives more weapon damage with the infusion from his first ability, and B, we get much more overguard from his Avalanche the higher our ability strength will be. So, I went for Growing Power in the Aura together with Power Drift. We don't need Prime Surefooted here because we have Overguard, so we cannot be knocked down. Transient Fortitude, Umbral Intensify, plus Mold Augmented as second Arcane. Then, of course, we use the Freeze Force Augment for his 1 so that we have the Cold Infusion on our weapon, plus the Biting Frost Augment for his passive that gives us the massive crit chance and crit damage on frozen enemies. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we have a good range for Avalanche, that we really freeze everybody in the room, and that is achieved by overextend it with Stretch, and in the last slot we go for Prime Continuity to have a bit more duration, also to keep the enemies frozen for a little bit longer. This right here would be the full build, but since it is relatively expensive to put together, I also made a budget version which you see on screen right now. This one, while not as OP as the previous one, is still really good, and if you want to put together a Frost on a budget, this is going to be the one to go for. So much for the build, but don't click away yet because the video ain't over. Since it is 2024, a Warframe build alone doesn't really do much without their companion, so let's take a look at who the best companion for Frost would be. And while you're pretty much free to use whatever you like, Frost doesn't have any specific requirements, my personal choice would be the Panzerwölbefeiler because this little critter is so amazing with the room-wide viral proccing, having every enemy inflicted with 10 viral status effects, making them super vulnerable, that the enemies will really have a bad day. Let's just say you're gonna absolutely annihilate everything in Steel Path. This right here would be my Panzerwölbefeiler build. Nothing special actually. The only thing here that is really important is of course viral quills, otherwise you won't have the viral priming. And other than that, you can pretty much do whatever you want. If you want some suggestions here, Calculated Redirection plus Reinforced Bond is going to be really strong, because Calculated Redirection will increase the shields of your Panzerwölbefeiler to over 1200, and Reinforced Bond will give you more fire rate if the shields of your companion are over 1200, so that's a nice synergy. And also Bite plus Tenacious Bond is great, because Bite increases the crit chance of your Panzer, and Tenacious Bond gives you another final crit damage multiplier if the crit chance of your companion is over 50%. So that also is a very great synergy here. And finally, before we wrap it up, let's also quickly talk about the weapon options here, because with Frost, you want to make sure to run the right weapons that synergize well with the crit buffs that he gives. See, the massive 200% crit chance buff from his passive augment is additive to crit chance from mods, meaning it's kind of like you put another crit chance and another crit damage mod onto your weapon. That means it will have a great effect on weapons that already have a high base crit chance, because that then scales even better, but on weapons that don't have good crit characteristics, you will unfortunately barely notice a difference. That's why, with Frost, you want to make sure to run a weapon that not only has a high base crit chance, but also ideally a high base crit damage multiplier, because only then will the damage numbers really go into the stratosphere. Some good suggestions here would be the Exceltra or Exceltra Prime. The Kuvasha Core is going to be absolutely disgusting, and also the Strun Prime Incarnon going fully into crit. That is going to be juicy. If you have any other weapon suggestions for Frost, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And if you now want to know which Warframes are stronger and which are worse after the recent update, then definitely don't miss this video right here. Another big shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nos Linux Gaming, Lycan Shepherd, Turtle Pier, Pepperwolf, Undercanio2, Misfire DX, StreamChat21, SignUpKing5000, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.